Can someone give me a highlight of what you got out of the homework, please?
7 questions. You have to like.
Yeah, but give me something from the reading of. Huh?
Scriptures for everyone.
Very nice.
Wow. So
Hilarious. Do you have anything? No? Ben? Anything from what you did on the homework? Any learning?
The takeaways.
Yeah.
So when? Oh.
Go ahead, Mark.
Wait, what are your takeaways?
He's getting prepped. Go ahead.
Okay. I was saying when I was reading Matthew chapter 1 through 14.
Okay. Go ahead, Mark. What you learn?
When I was reading Matthew chapters 1 through 14, I really like chapter 13 of Matthew because it talks about the parables. Like when Jesus was talking the parables to all of his disciples.
Very nice. Anything about the personality? Did you guys pick up anything on Matthew's personality? Maybe? No? Okay. We'll get to talk about that soon. Ben, anything that you want to share? No? Fidel?
The canonical book is inspired divinely.
Very good. It's inspired by the Holy Spirit. Kiro, anything to share?
Are you doing this on purpose?
No. I've been asking everyone. Rosa? I'll get to you. I'll get back to you.
So it was mainly like the first few chapters was mainly like history behind the birth of Jesus.
Okay.
And then I like how he talked about many of the miracles he did.
Yes.
And one important point that he pointed out was the faith that the people had.
Very good. Okay. Anybody else has anything they want to add? Mario?
The first chapter was on genealogy.
Okay.
That's the only thing to do.
Okay, I just want to remind everybody.
I'm sorry.
No worries. I just want to remind everybody, no phones, no watches, nothing. I don't want people to be looking at or texting anybody. I want us to pay attention. Okay, let's recap because we have some new people in the class. Welcome.
Thank you.
So let's recap from the last lecture. We talked about the Old Testament and the New Testament. How many books are in the Old Testament?
39.
39. How long did it take to write it?
1,000 plus.
1,000 plus years. About the New Testament, how many years? How many books? 27. Very good. And how many years?
40.
Very good. Okay. What's the difference between us and Jews?
That they don't use the New Testament.
Very good. They're still waiting for the Messiah. So they only have the Old Testament. The New Testament, Old Testament plus New Testament equals Christianity. Yes.
Didn't they also believe that Gentiles couldn't be saved?
Yes, that's very true. And we'll talk about that. That's actually one of the letters that St. Paul wrote to one of the continents that he sent a letter to specifically talk about the Gentiles. And we'll talk about that. Okay, let's see what else. We talked about who is the author?
The Holy Spirit.
The Holy Spirit, very good. And we talked about that the first 4 Gospels focus on how many? The first what centuries?
3.
4.
The first 30, very good. The first 30 to 33, which is basically when Christ was alive, right? So it's the 4 Gospels, and they focus on the first 33 years. What focuses on the next 30 years?
Acts.
Acts. Okay, very good. And then the following ones? The letters, right? In those 30, we also look at the letters. How many letters does St. Paul write? 14. Okay, very good. And 14 is basically more than half of the New Testament, because the New Testament is 27 books, and 14 of them are St. Paul's. Okay, very good. Let's see, I'm just trying to pick some easy stuff from last time. We talked about the story of God and man. Remember the cheers?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. And you guys remember the 7 days of creation?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, very good. Yesterday in another lecture for some of the boys that are here, if you guys remember, we talked about God's wisdom, right? If you guys recall, anybody recalls that?
Yes.
Yes, okay. We said God's wisdom was what? God made the water before he made the grass. So the grass can have something to eat. Then he made the animals so that they can have something to eat. So they have grass.
As well.
And drink.
Yeah.
And then he made the human to enjoy everything, right? So there's wisdom in everything of how he created. So you got the 7 days, we talked about that. And we talked about how God doesn't turn away from anybody, right? We are the ones that turn away from him. And that's why salvation had to come. And that's why Jesus had to incarnate. I'm just recapping everything that we did last time. And then we talked about the 2 different types of people that we're going to focus on. Who were they?
The Jews and
The
Greeks.
Jews
And the Gentiles. Gentiles.
and the Gentiles. What does Gentiles mean?
Everybody
Other
else.
nations.
Everybody else other than the Jews.
Okay.
Very good. Okay, and we talked about the canon books. What does canon mean?
Like origin law, rules.
Origin law, rules. What else about it?
Isn't it?
It's like a value or importance.
It's recognized by
the church.
the church. Okay, I didn't hear you. I'm sorry. So it's recognized and accepted by the church. And we also talked about the covenants, right? What does the word covenant mean?
Isn't that agreement? No, that's testament. Never mind.
It's a promise. Covenant means promise.
Same thing.
Okay. Covenant, testament. Testament means it's a will, right? We talked about the New Testament. We explained what it is. And let's see what else. Did you guys read about the early fathers? There was 3 pages in there. Everybody read that in the packet? That was for part of the homework?
No.
I'm getting a lot of nods in the room. That's good, except for Amanda. Just kidding. Okay, we talked about the 4 living creatures. You guys remember that?
Yeah.
The 4 living creatures. Who remembers what they were? Who is Matthew?
Oh, man.
Matthew was a human.
The man. Yes.
Yeah.
And what does that represent?
Nativity.
Nativity. So we're talking about the fil Qubba in the dome. You'll see the 4 living creatures. الأربع كائنات. And we said the first one is the man or Matthew. That's the Gospel of Matthew, and it's nativity. What's the next one? What's the ox?
Luke. And that's
Luke. Luke. And what was that?
Crucifixion.
Crucifixion, because he focused on the sacrificial Christ, how Christ sacrificed himself on our behalf. So we have nativity and we have crucifixion. What's next?
The eagle?
The lion.
Oh, my bad.
Who's the lion?
Mark.
Mark. Very good. He called his name out. Okay, and why? Why is it represented by the lion?
Resurrection.
Resurrection and power. So the resurrection is power, and that's the lion. And then the last one is
Eagle.
the eagle, and that's who?
John.
John. Okay, and why?
It's ascension.
Ascension. Perfect. Okay. Should we move on? Should we start today's lecture?
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah.
I think that's good. I think that's one thing that I want to remind you guys that we talked about, and we talked about how the 4 Gospels are canonical, right? And we talked about how you had 4 different people write it from 4 different places at all different times, and we talked about a bunch of different evidence. Do you guys remember that? Okay, good.
Internal and external.
Huh?
Internal and external evidence.
Yes, very good. Internal and external evidence. And I had you guys read in the homework about the external evidence, which is all the early, you have all the early fathers, and then the internal evidence, you have the actual Gospels, and we get to learn about the styles and all that. So we'll jump today into lecture 2. So let's get started. So today we're really going to focus on the Gospel, okay? So what does the word Gospel mean?
Good news.
Good news. Okay, very good. So the word gospel actually comes from the word evangelion, right? Sorry. Evangelion. I don't know what I just said. It's evangelion. Okay. No, but seriously. So it comes from the word. I don't know why it's spelled like this one, but it's evangelion.
Yep.
Okay. So actually, when Romans went into battle and they would win a war, they would stand up and say, Evangelion, Evangelion, which means good news, we won. Okay? So this word was used during that time a lot. And you'll hear Abuna will say, Evangelion, Toccata, Luca, Matteo, Agio Evangelion, right? So Abuna will always say that because it means that we're reading a book from St. Luke or St. Mark or St. Matthew of the good news, Evangelion, which is the word gospel. Yes?
If or if?
Ev.
Okay.
Evangelion. I don't know why this is a very old slide, so I'm sorry. I haven't had a chance to update anything. But so that's what the word actually gospel means. And we have 4 gospels and they're all interconnected, and we're gonna talk about that here. There's something called synoptic gospels. And that's exactly what today's session is on. Synoptic gospels. So I'll show you guys how they all are very connected. Okay. So, again, this indicates the Thanksgiving offering for the good news. So if you see in the liturgy or whatever, we always start by the prayer of thanksgiving, right? And that's where giving thanks for the good news, for having Christ. So we always start with thanksgiving in anything we start. Whatever it is, even funerals, okay? And again, as I said, it was used in the Romans, to declare victory, and it describes God's victory, and it's mentioned 54 times by St. Paul. So St. Paul in his letters, he mentions the word gospel 54 times, and in the entire New Testament 72 times. Okay? Alright, let's keep going. So, we're gonna get here in some very serious information. So, the books, the actual Bible, I need you guys to understand that this is not a history book. Okay? And the reason why I say that is because we have a liturgy. The liturgy makes us live the Bible. So if we didn't have liturgy, the Bible would be nothing but a history book. Okay? Do you guys understand? Because we get to live it. So that's why it's not history, because we get to live it. And so you get to witness and to see all the different seasons that the church created the liturgy in a way throughout the entire year to get you to see the gospel, basically. The gospels all in full. We basically go through all of it from start to finish. Okay? And so here, we're talking that basically that the gospels are not just biography. That's why I'm saying it's not a history book. And it's not about the chronological order, even though we talked about 2 books that were in chronological order. But they're much, much bigger and much, much deeper than that. Okay? So one, they offer us the person of Christ. So we get to learn about Christ himself, and that helps us understand who he is so we can accept him, live by him and in him, and partake in his sufferings and his glory. Okay? So we get to partake in all of Christ from start to finish. So the events, for example, of the last week, of the Passion Week, from entering Jerusalem all the way to resurrection, all those are very critical in the gospel, and we get to live that, right? Holy Week, Palm Sunday, and we go through each day, right? So again, it's not a biography, it's not history. And so you'll notice here that the first 30 years are not included, right? So if you read into the Gospels, there's very small snippets about the birth of Christ. And actually that was a lot of the details is in which book? Luke. Why?
Because he was very detail oriented.
There's something specific.
Because he got information from St. Mary.
Very good. So we talked about that last time. St. Luke had a lot of communication with St. Mary, the mother of Christ. She gave him a lot of the information that he has in his books. Okay? So the birth, the Annunciation, her meeting with Elizabeth, all this stuff, Luke had the chance to sit with St. Mary quite a lot. And he was the first one to draw the icon of St. Mary. Okay? So St. Luke was the first iconographer of the icon of St. Mary. Okay? We'll talk again more in detail about Luke. We'll have a whole session just about Luke. But here we talk about death. A lot of the Gospels focus on the death and the resurrection. They dominate the story. And there's a reason why. And the reason why is because, as we said, when they started writing the Gospels, they started writing it not just because for any reason. They started writing it because there was a lot of passing of information from one person to the next, and the story started getting out of hand. So the disciples said, let's bring it back in and let's write exactly what happened, so people don't expand the story. Okay? Yes?
I know, what you're saying makes sense, but I feel like in a lot of stories, or like in a lot of books, like let's say like Matthew and John,
Yes.
they would write 2 of the same stories, but they would have like very different details. Not like very different. It's the same idea, but
Yeah.
like some details are,
Yeah.
like the first one that I think of is when Mary Magdalene went to the tomb.
Yes.
One story says that John and Peter were with her, and another one says it was just her by herself.
Yes.
One says like,
Yes.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So-
That's actually very, very good, and we're gonna talk about that. But the quick short answer to that is the personality of the writer. Okay, so again, Matthew focused in a way that he was telling a story. Luke, we talked about Luke. Luke is a storyteller, right? So we talked about Luke chapter 3. I'm just gonna use that example again to make sure the message goes in. But Luke chapter 3 is talking about John the Baptist. It talks from when John kneeled in Elizabeth's womb to where he baptized Christ, to basically him dying, right? If you read it, it doesn't make sense. The story is not, it doesn't add up, right? There's no way all that happened in one chapter. So he's a storyteller, okay? Versus Mark, he wants to get to the point, right? He's talking to Romans, he's talking to powerful people. Get to the point, show him how strong he is. Show the strong Messiah, okay? So that hopefully that answers your question. It's just the personality, okay? Again, you're gonna see how similar they are. We're gonna talk about the Synoptic Gospels. Okay, so there's this word right here. I'm not even gonna attempt to say it, but anybody wants to attempt to say it? What?
Which one?
Either
The
one.
one that he put in Exo?
Yeah, either one. Yeah, sure. That worked.
Why don't you search it up?
So there is one person. His name is Titan. He was one of the early fathers. Okay, and what he did, he was from the 2nd century, and what he did was he combined all 4 Gospels into one, and the church ignored this. They said this is wrong. So the church does not utilize the goal of the Gospel is not to collect and put everything in a chronological order. We already have 2 books that do that, but that's not the reason of how the Gospels are written. But it's that we want to witness complementary or the same stories, actually, like kind of what Mark was saying. We want to see complementary stories leading to the one truth. Does that make sense? Okay, but combining all into one, that will actually confuse people. Because who wrote that one? Was it Mark? Was it Luke? Was it John? Who was it? So the church refused. They ignored this completely. So if you ever hear people talking about this, you may not even recognize what they're saying because the word is really tough to say. But you gotta understand that the church specifically left it as the 4 Gospels, and Saint Athanasius, when he was the Pope, we'll look at that, I think next lecture, we'll look at what Saint Athanasius said, but he basically said forever we're locked in. No one touches this anymore. And so we'll see what he said, okay? So again, the church fathers did not care for combining and sorting chronologically. That's not the goal, okay? They wanted to uncover the depth of the content. Does that make sense? Everybody with me? Okay, let's move on. Can someone read this for me? Anybody? Yeah, go ahead for that.
Origin says as every chord of a harp gives a particular sound that appears different from other chord sounds. And the unmusical man that does not fathom the music harmony might think that the chords are not used to hearing and recognizing the harmony of God, the Word, in the holy books. He might think old does not agree with the new, or the prophets with the law, or the gospels with each other and with the rest of the disciples.
Okay, very good. Anyone understood anything from this? By the way, this is basically the definition of Synoptic Gospels. So what does this mean? This is a hint I just gave you. Huh? Anybody? So Origin, whatever, however, a lot of people say his name different, but he's a scholar from the 2nd century. If you read also the homework, you would have read a little bit more about Origin and Origin, whatever. I can't speak English today, I'm sorry guys. But he's from the 2nd century, and he provides evidence and talks about how there is harmony between the Gospels and the rest of the New Testament books. Okay? So even though each one discusses from a different point of view, please no phones. Even though each book discusses the facts from a different point of view, he's saying that there's so much harmony between the Gospels. Okay? So he compares the Holy Book to a harp. Do you see where it says there? Do you guys see where it says that? Yes? Are you guys here?
Yes.
Okay. So he compares the Holy Book to a harp with many chords, right? So you know the harp that David has?
Yes.
So he's comparing it to a harp, and he's saying that each time they play a chord, it delivers a beautiful and harmonious melody. because they're all interconnected. And that's the point of a synoptic gospel. Okay? Good with me? Everybody with me so far?
Yes.
So, Mark, Luke, and Matthew. Those are the three synoptic gospels. Okay? So here, let me show you this. Don't get overwhelmed. But these are the three gospels that are called to be the synoptic gospels. Anybody knows why John is not included in this?
Wait,
Huh.
no. I had it. Never mind.
Is it because
You can take a guess. We just talked about it. Haram alayki. It's right here. It means that the gospels are in harmony. It means that when you, like what I was saying with the harp, when you play imagine when you play an instrument, right? If you're playing the piano, when you play a song and you press all the different buttons,
Like the tunes?
yeah, the tune makes such a nice sound. That's kind of what a synoptic means. It means that they all go together to give you a very nice melody. Gives you a very nice collected story.
It's like each chord making like a different sound. Is like
Yes,
Yeah.
very good. That's exactly right on. Okay? It's different personalities giving you the same information, right? But it's giving you in different melodies, different beats of the music. Yes.
I think it's because John and Mark are overlapped and they kind of run the same personality and no.
No, John is not included.
is it because
John
Yeah.
is not a synoptic gospel.
So like you can't put John.
John does
because
not
it's so similar to
harmony.
Mark.
When you play John, he goes with the other three. It doesn't work. Okay.
Yeah. I mean-
So then we'll talk about why. Okay. So I'll go ahead, Q. لا تفضل يا حبيبي.
No.
لا please.
You said go.
Okay, the main reason, I'll just give you guys the short, quick reason of why John is not included in this. John, he was born in 11 AD. So if you guys look in the history, you'll see that he was born 11 AD. And he wrote the book of John between 90 and 100 AD. He was the last person to write. He was the last disciple to live. And he was fighting a different battle than the other three people here, right? He was trying to prove a lot about the heresies that people were talking about. So you'll see that his book focuses on something a little bit different. Okay? It still gives a lot of the same stories, but he did look and said, they already talked about this, I'm gonna focus on these because that was the time where there was a lot of heresies. And that's why he was focusing more on after resurrection and more of that information and all to respond against those heretics. Okay? And that's why Polycarp is the disciple of Saint John, and Saint John is the disciple of Saint John the Baptist. So Saint John the Baptist, his disciple was Saint John the disciple. Okay? Do you guys understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yes. Huh? So Saint John the Baptist, Saint John the disciple, Polycarp, okay? And so that's the disciples' rhythm. So you'll see that Polycarp talks about how Saint Polycarp, basically there's a book about against the heretics, and you can read where he references a lot from Saint John. Okay, yes.
Last week when we were talking about you were talking about Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and
Yes.
how they're all different.
Yes.
You said that Matthew fulfills a lot of the Old Testament prophecies.
Yes, yeah.
So isn't that kind of
No, the reason why I said that, so the reason why I said that last time was because if you guys look from the Old Testament to the New Testament, what's the first book in New Testament? Matthew. And I said the reason why it's the first book is because after you finish reading the Old Testament, you go introduce yourself to the New Testament through Matthew. Because Matthew talks about, 30 plus, I don't know how many exactly, but he talks about a lot of the Old Testament prophecies being fulfilled in the New Testament. That was his goal. That was his main focus. So that's why it transitions from the Old Testament to the New Testament with Matthew being first. Because the fathers assume that people finish reading the Old Testament and then they start in the New Testament and they read Matthew first as the order of them. Because Matthew does explain a lot about the fulfillment of those
So is that
prophecies.
why John's last out of the four?
No, John lived the longest, as I just said.
No, I mean
That's
last
what
one
I'm
that
saying,
John
said
in the
it should
Bible.
be last.
Well, yes, and he also was the last one with the different information than the other three. Yes. Ben, sorry, go ahead.
So the reason John isn't in the Synoptic Gospels is because Matthew, Mark, and Luke basically talked about categories that were similar.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
John
Yes.
is not talking about those categories
Yes.
that are similar.
Yes, very good.
Good.
So basically, in a quick summary, the book of Mark, the book of Saint Mark, has 661 verses, and it reproduced 80% in Matthew. So Matthew has 1,068 verses, and 80% of those are from Mark, and 65% are in Luke. Okay, so let's talk about this. So here's Mark. I just want you guys to focus on the screen when you get a chance here, so we can look at this together. Okay, so there's something called the triple tradition, and there's something called the double tradition. Okay,
Sorry.
so the triple tradition means that it's in all three. Okay, are you guys with me? Please, Mark, up here. Triple tradition means that the stories are in all three. So basically, 76% of Mark is in 41% of Luke and 46% of Matthew. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. And then double tradition means it's only in these two. So 23% of Luke matches 23% of Matthew. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, now let's look at Mark. So Mark
It's the least used.
Mark has the most in common with everybody. 76% of him is in the other two. 18% matches between Mark and Matthew. And then you have 3% matching between Mark and Luke only. And then there's only this much that's left for Mark. What percent is that?
2? That's 3.
Is that one?
It
I
says
can't
3.
see from back here.
Up here? Oh yeah, that's 3, you're right. Yes, thank you. So only 3% is unique to Mark. Do you guys understand that's so basically almost everything is in Matthew and Luke. Okay? So now, if we look in Luke, 35% of Luke is just unique to Luke. Okay? And then 1% matches with Mark, and then 41% matches with Mark and Matthew, and then 23% matches just with Luke and Matthew. Okay? Everybody understands? And then Matthew, just so we understand the pie, 20% is just unique to Matthew, and then 24% is unique to him and Luke. They have that in matching, and then 10% between him and just Mark, and then 46% again goes back with Matthew or with Mark. Make sense? Yes.
You're probably going to talk about it, but why are these numbers so important?
They're important because there's a lot that you want to understand from this. So basically, this commonality between all of them, the synoptic is not just words, but it's the whole phrase. It's not just the sayings of Jesus, but it's the narrative material. Okay? So this is what we mean by the connection between the Gospels. Okay? So you need to understand that they are connected. Okay? And there's also, which one of these was first written?
Matthew.
Okay, good. A lot of people don't actually know that. So Matthew, so hold on, I want to show you guys this. This is in Arabic, but this is like written on the old paper. But the first book that was written, sorry, this is in Arabic, but the first book that was written was Matthew in 40 AD in Palestine. Okay, and then the next one was Mark in Egypt in 45 AD. But here's the big difference. Mark was translated. This one was actually lost. Okay? Yeah. So then you'll see that you'll see again Matthew, and basically Matthew writes on later, but it's translated into Greek. Okay? So that's why we say that Mark is the first one. Okay? But let's go back to focus on this.
Wait, so what was Matthew first written in?
I believe it was written in Aramaic.
Oh.
Yes.
Isn't that what Jesus taught?
And it was lost. And then, huh?
Isn't that what Jesus taught in?
Yes, that's the language of Christ. But yeah. Aramaic.
How is it
Okay.
translated if it was lost?
Huh?
How is it translated?
He wrote again.
Oh.
Yeah. He wrote again.
They lost it, so it's something on the
Okay.
Y'all lost it.
Let's keep going. Okay, let's keep going. There's actually a really nice sermon by Amba Bavli. There is a school called School of Terianos, if you guys have ever heard of it. But it's like hardcore, like content of this stuff, and it's like hours and hours You might enjoy it. بالعربي لمبا بافلي كنيسة تريانوس. It is something else. Like, if you truly want to get in the grind of details, these are people that have PhD degrees in this stuff.
It's
Okay,
Arabic
like,
ceremony?
huh? It's on YouTube. Yeah, it's on YouTube. A lot of this content is actually from that, just so you guys know. So,
Very Coptic.
huh?
Okay.
Yeah, of course.
He's
You
Mark.
think this is all me?
This,
No way,
he's
bro.
Mark, and then like he has like 3%
No way.
unique to himself.
Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so the 4 Gospels. Can you guys see this? Sorry, that's at the bottom of the screen.
Can you see?
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna deep. This is my last slide, but we're gonna take a little bit of time to deep dive into each of these. Okay, so let's talk about. We have Mark first. Okay, so Mark is known as the strong. We already talked about this, right? And that was the power, right? And from 60 to 61 AD, and he opens the gospel with a voice crying in the wilderness, right? And then the Christ in this gospel focuses on the mighty and the strong figure and overcoming evil and sin and all the different kind of miracles. And if you look at this here, again, this is Mark talking to a powerful people, all kinds of powerful people. So he wants to deliver a message that this God, please stop, that this God does miracles, he is mighty, he is strong, he can overcome evil, and he can overcome sin. And his prior job was that he was studying the law, and then he was an apostle. So we have 2 apostles, we have 2 disciples. Okay? 2 apostles, 2 disciples. He wrote in Rome, and he wrote it to the Romans. Okay? So, again, we said that the Romans were very powerful people. And they were proud of how intimidating they were. Okay? So they were people of authority. So the Romans believed in power and violence. Okay? They believed in power and violence. And that's basically, if they're powerful and they're violent, that means that they are mature and they have a nice life. That's how the Romans behaved back then. Okay? And Saint Mark, basically here, he offers the strong Christ, as we talked. That's why Mark is recognized as the lion. That helps the humanity in need. Okay, so he focuses on helping the humanity in need. He conquers the powers of evil and sin. He does miracles, and the spirituality is what amazes everybody, right? And then he defeated the devil by his cross and love. We know that, right? Not through what? Not through violence. This is the key message here, is that he did not attain beating the devil through any war or any violence. He was actually praying for them on the cross, right? So here, Mark is trying to teach them, St. Mark is trying to teach them that it's not about being violent, it's not about being powerful, but you can actually win the battle through love. And that was one of the biggest messages that he was trying. Okay? And so, again, if the Romans were occupied by their empire in that known world that they have of that time, that gospel, according to St. Mark, attracted them to different kind of kingdoms, okay, that depend on the power of the Spirit and divine work, not an arrogant human person. Does that make sense? So you're relying on, basically, God, Jesus had so many different kingdoms, but he didn't have that through arrogance or power or violence, right? It was out of his love and his death on the cross. And that was the message that Mark was trying to deliver. Make sense?
Sure.
Do we
Yes?
need to memorize all these small details?
It's good to know because as you start teaching, and if someone asks you about a specific story in one of the Gospels, you can easily explain why this person wrote it the way that they wrote it based on the personality of the writer. So it's good to know it. And the church actually tries to make us learn it. So whenever you walk in the church, you see the 4 Gospels in the dome. And so you're supposed to automatically remember nativity, crucifixion, resurrection, ascension, right? So you remember the big events. And then you remember the 4 Gospels. And then you can remember, strong, sacrificial, he was a man, but he also ascended. So you remember all these different things. I would say try to remember as much as you can.
Yeah,
I would
try.
recommend.
I have a bad memory.
Yeah, no, so it comes with practice.
Yeah.
It'll come with practice. And as you guys keep doing your homework, as you guys keep reading the book, each of the books, you'll truly see the difference. Like I've seen, there's a research that I can share with you guys at the end of all this. I can show you, there's a book that I have that puts the 4 Gospels next to each other, and it shows you the exact verses. It's a pretty big book, but you can literally look at it, compare each Gospel to the next, and you'll see how Matthew writes. Mark was known as an offensive writer. Like, he doesn't care to offend anybody. So Matthew and Luke would try to fix that. They would say it in a nicer way, right? So Mark was known to be very straightforward with his message. So if you guys read his messages, boom, everything is just right there. And that's why his book is very short. It's the shortest of all of them. If you want to read the shortest gospel, go read Mark. Okay? Even though Mark is very tall. Okay, all right, let's keep going. Okay, Luke. All right, Luke. So Luke was writing to the Greeks. This is critical. The Greeks were philosophers. These are people that understand literature. They're scholars. So they're very well educated. Okay? And did Luke write what he saw?
No.
What did he write from?
Say Mary.
Who else?
Everyone who was with them.
Eyewitnesses. So if we open, I have to open it to show you guys real quick. 1 second, I'll open Luke.
Last week.
It's Luke 1 verse 1. It's in the very beginning. I'll just open it real quick. Okay, I'll just read it so you guys hear me out. Inasmuch as many have taken in hand to set in order a narrative of those things which have been fulfilled among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word, delivering them to us. It seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding. He had to have perfect understanding of all the things from the very first, to write to you an orderly account, most excellent Theophilus, that you know the certainty of those things in which you were instructed. So he's heard from eyewitnesses, he understood, and he verified. So he's not telling you, I just copied what people are telling me. He understood and he verified the information. Okay? This is the key point about Luke. Is he was standing with Jesus, right? I mean, he was not there. He's a little on the later side when you talk about from a time frame. But he got all his information from eyewitnesses. Okay? Okay, so we said it was written to the Greeks. They're scholars, they're philosophers, they read a lot, they're literature. And this is recognized as the most eloquent text, the most detail-oriented text. And it's literally recognized as the word brilliant and eloquent text. That's the framework by one of the early fathers. Okay? And here, as we talked about, so we said he's a physician, right? That means he was a doctor. And even St. Paul, I think he was talking one time to St. Luke, we'll get to it. And he was talking to St. Luke and he was calling him basically the physician. So we know that there was a relationship there too, right? And so he was also an apostle, and he focuses on the sacrificial lamb. So he focuses a lot on Holy Week. So if you guys pay attention, Holy Week, a lot of the readings are from Luke because he goes into great details. Okay? He talks about Christ as the priest or the servant. He talks about saving humanity. And the way that he talks about saving humanity is that he brings Christ into humanity by saying, he was saying that he was after the people that were educated and the illiterate. He was after the simple and the rich. He was after philosophers and simple people, or violent people like Romans. So he was writing to show that God was for everybody, to save humanity. He wanted to save humanity. He didn't just want to save a type of people. He wanted to save humanity in general. Okay? And he talks about it by the love of God, of how he sacrifices himself in order to save us. Everybody with me on the same page?
Yes.
So, Greek people used to dwell on like perfection, like perfect things. They like everything perfect, written well, otherwise they wouldn't even look at it. So that's why you'll notice that when I said that he's an eloquent writer and very professional in his writing, that is because he was writing to the Greeks, okay? And so, sorry, so Luke starts, the gospel opens with the annunciation of John the Baptist's birth. And his book is from 6063 AD, and we said he is the offering or the sacrificial or the calf or the ox. You can call that or that. And he basically talks about how Christ, you know, with him saving humanity, he is perfect, but he's also merciful. Okay? And we always say that Christ, God, is merciful but just. Okay? So he's merciful when you're alive, he's just when we die. Make sense? So, but he focuses on the perfection of Christ and his mercy. Okay? And he tells them how, you know, Christ was born of a woman, he was known as the Son of Man, he's a true God, he is the only Savior of men, and he talks about Jesus Christ the Nazarene, right? From the very poor place. And so Luke, he starts and ends in Jerusalem, okay? As the holy city. And then that salvation occurs there. So he starts and ends it in Jerusalem, and that salvation happens there, okay? He does address the Gentiles, and he explains more, he clarifies that salvation is also for them, okay? We good?
Yeah.
All right, Matthew. Matthew was, as we said, he was born of St. Mary. He's recognized as the man. Again, as I put here, there's two dates of the writings because we said he wrote the first one in around 40 AD, and then the second one, which was translated around 60, 67. And as you can see from the timeline here, this is the earliest one from 60, 61. And actually, there is like research that shows like preciseness within like a week or so of exactly when it was written, based on the different writings and when they found it and all this different stuff. So Matthew, we focus on the 60, 67, and he opens the gospel with the genealogy of Christ. You guys know what I'm talking about, genealogy? What is it? Let me open it so you guys can. What's genealogy?
Like the bloodline, like who's related to who.
Yes, very good. So, anyone knows when we read this? When do we read this?
Oh, I know this.
Huh? Any bonus point for anybody that knows
We
this?
just read it. We just read it.
Wait.
Nativity?
When? Good job.
Okay.
Bonus point for Mark.
I didn't even hear you.
Hey, count down the final.
Yeah, you're getting a bonus point. Okay, so the genealogy, the first chapter talks about the book of genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac, Isaac begot Jacob, Jacob begot Judah and his brothers, Judah got blah 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 blah, and we go all the way to where it says Jacob begot Joseph, the husband of Mary, whom was born Jesus, is called Christ. Okay? So we start from all the way there, all the way to Christ. Okay? So he starts with the genealogy. Why did he do that?
I wrote it down.
Why did he do that?
Why did you do it?
يا لهوي حرام.
Oh
What do you mean? Why did?
To connect
ربنا يخليكي. Thank you. Yes, to connect to the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, all we read about is all these names. You read about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, Perez, Ram, Salmon, Nahab, Rahab, Boaz, Obed, Ruth. You read about all this in the Old Testament. So he connects it all the way to Joseph and then Christ. Okay? Hello. Yameen. Very nice. Okay. So Christ in the gospel here, he's the Messiah, the man, the king. He came to fulfill the Old Testament. We talked about it. He was a tax collector. Do you guys know how old tax collectors were treated back in the old
They
days?
hated
They
it.
hated tax collectors.
They hated.
They were up.
They hated them so much. They would basically, like, in order for them to go out in the public, they either have a Roman soldier with them,
Yeah, that's it.
or they hide, like they get like
A rope.
a little horse with or a dude that basically carries them in a trunk thing, and they cover themselves, and they just hide until they get to their office. And once they get to their office, people cannot stand tax collectors. Yes.
Wasn't like if they just felt like it, they could take more and more money.
Yeah.
That's exactly what they did. That's why they were hated. It's because the Romans required a specific amount of money, and they said, "Well, you actually owe this." Like I think I was reading something in one of the research, and it was talking about how they would hold up the bag and it would be like, that's only 1,000. I need another bag, and they didn't even count it. You see what I'm saying? So there was a lot of theft. There was a lot of theft. So people, let's focus please, we're almost done.
Dude, they're making fun of me. They're calling me a tax collector.
You're Mark.
But they're making fun of me.
That's
Like, they're saying
Matthew.
I'm gonna be a tax collector.
Matthew right there.
Okay, make fun of him, bro.
Okay, let's
Hey, I just found a bonus for today. Another one.
yeah, literally. So again, Matthew, if you guys, I'm gonna give you this analogy so you guys can see what life is with Christ. But Matthew, before he met Christ, he would hold his book with the accounting, and he would walk around. People that see him, they hate him. Okay, they hate him just when they see him. After he met Christ, he was walking around with what? His gospel, right? He was basically walking around with the good news. People loved him. So this is the difference between when you live with Christ versus when you don't live with Christ. People will hate you versus people will love you when you are with Christ. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
You can argue that people will love you when you're with Christ.
All right.
We won't get into that right
We can argue after, but you gotta understand, as you get closer to God, and everybody else who's trying to get closer to God, that becomes your circle. And that becomes the right people that you should be, that they're after the same goal. And if you're after the same goal, they will love you, and you will love them. Okay. So he talks about Jesus, the expected king. This was written specifically to the Jews. Yep. And basically it's about embracing Christianity. Okay. So since the Jews they were expecting Christ, the son of David, and so he basically tells them that Jesus is the expected king. But
they say no.
The Jews were starting to convert to Christians, and some did not. And those were the ones that stayed back, and they basically rejected Christ, right? So, and then there was another, after some Jews started converting to Christianity, there was Gentiles. And there was a rumor that Gentiles can't convert. They can never become Christians. But then St. Paul had to send a letter to say, hey, Christianity is for everybody. It's not just for Jews. It's also for Gentiles, for Samaritans, for everybody. Yes.
This is completely off point. Or like,
No
what
worries.
does Hanukkah mean to the Jews?
Hanukkah?
Yeah.
This is an offline topic. Let's not get into it.
Bonus point guard, bro.
Because like I was thinking like Christmas.
This is
and
becoming a different lesson.
It's like thinking of Christmas and like they celebrated during the same time and like
Yeah.
they don't believe in Christ.
Yeah,
So
they celebrate them killing God.
Okay, let's move
Wait,
on.
is
We'll talk after.
No,
Please,
I'm
please don't
joking.
make fun of the guy. Leave him alone. Okay, let's look at the last one because we're almost out of time. So Saint John the Beloved, or the Eagle, or Ascension, and he starts by "In the beginning was the Word." Right? When you guys read which gospel?
Johan?
What in the Agbeya, which hour?
Oh,
In the
cool.
beginning
yeah.
was the word, and the word was
First hour.
The first hour.
6.
11?
We're just guessing.
9.
12 hour.
Someone said it, but they.
I said first hour.
It's not
No, I
first.
said third.
9.
I said third. I said it in the beginning.
I didn't- I said-
I
You
said-
said no.
Hey, check the tape.
I was holding
Are
3
you
up
sure?
though.
I'm
What's first?
checking.
What's first?
He doesn't even know.
I
I'm
was
checking, but
holding-
I'm pretty sure it's the.
I was holding up
So-
3.
Maybe it is the first. It is,
Yeah.
I think it is the first.
Hey, don't take my point away.
One second.
I need that.
Let me just check. I think it is the first. I just wanted to say, but that one is by Jean. But yes, yes.
It's first hour, right?
Oh, that is Jean.
Yeah,
We're talking
Matthew.
about Jean. Yes,
Yeah.
it is the first. Yes.
Said the 8th bag.
Come on now.
-1 for Q. Okay.
Well, -5 for the teacher.
I was just testing you. Manish, I'm sorry. It's one away. No, but it is the first hour. Good job. Okay, so John was actually writing to the whole world. This was about the incarnation, and he wrote it in Ephesus, or that's Asia Minor. We'll talk about the locations when we get to, I think this is like lecture 6, but we'll talk about the locations of John in his lecture. He was also a disciple, he was a fisherman, and he talks about Christ, who is God himself, who is divine. And again, as we said, he says, for it was written to believers that know Christ. So basically he was writing to the entire world, not just any specific community, Romans, Greeks, or Jews. Okay, he was writing to everybody. And he, as we said, he wrote it between 90 and 100 AD. He was the last disciple to be alive. And he focuses on demonstrating the divinity of Christ and incarnation. Okay? I think that's everything I had. And again, huh?
Few homework?
Any questions? Any questions, anybody?
Oh, yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
In the homework it says, share some verses.
We can, let me just pause, let me stop the recording.
I'm gonna